Our next speakers are Pat Dawson, who is Governor of Limerick Prison, but also is the chair of the Irish Prison Service Working Group, who's tasked with implementing the Families and Imprisonment Group report. He'll be speaking first, and then he'll be followed by Larry Cléir, who works with Bedford Road Project, who provides support for families who are affected by imprisonment. So,
thank you very much. Okay, good morning everybody. Sorry, good afternoon. It's afternoon. I suppose Families and Imprisonment Group, what I'm going to do is just give you a brief background about where this group came from and then talk about the specific things that we're doing, particularly in Limerick Prison, where I'm the Governor, and where we're doing some initiatives around the Family Imprisonment Group report. So the Family Imprisonment Group original report, it's about highlighting the importance of visits, and I suppose it echoes a lot of the themes that Vivian Rose and that Albie Sachs raised as well this morning around the importance of the family unit, and maybe looking at how we do the visits in a prison setting that will enable a different outcome or a better outcome or improved relationships in the family unit that may indeed help people on their journey to assistance, which Vivian referenced Alan Weaver, who I first speak as well on the same topic. So the IPRT did a report, I think that was 12, very good, on picking up the pieces, and that started a conversation with the Irish Prison Service around looking at what we could do to improve our offering in terms of visits and the outcomes that flow from that. So a group was set up then where they looked at all the various elements of it, and it became, part of our 3-year strategic plan, which again, you didn't quite steal all of my stuff, but so it's about strengthening families and to facilitate ongoing contact with prisoners while in custody, reintegration post-release, and appropriate supports and programs. So that's a very simple sentence, but there's a lot of very big ideas in that. And I suppose what the group did was to complete these are the big tasks that were undertaken, and so they did a surveys of prisons to see what's going on right now, survey of prison visits, looking at what was actually being offered, architectural survey around the actual physical rooms and facilities provided, consultation then with various prisoner groups, with community-based groups, research, and then liaison with the other groups like PACT, UCC, Families Outside, visits to other jurisdictions to see how they use improved visitor models, and then they formulated a report. Now, I've been to Northern Ireland, I've been to Wales and Scotland, looking at how they do it, and this will come out as we go through the presentation. So what the Family Imprisonment Group then was to help to draft an IPS policy around the role and function of visits. So if we acknowledge that visits, and family visits in particular, are a core element of rehabilitation, and that they present an opportunity for intervention, how then can we change what we do on visits to make that actually happen? So that's the challenge. So the rationale for the policy around the human rights thing, and this was alluded to this morning as well, around the UN Charter for Children and the Human Rights Convention, and the evidence that's there that offered through the EU Coping Project that enhance resettlement and reduce offending, and again this is the intergenerational piece, Vivian, that you mentioned as well, and the fact that 6 out of 10 children of offenders go on to offend, and we're getting these people coming in through our prison system, and we're not, in lots of cases, dealing with the actual core issue of the family unit and the child being centre of that from this perspective, but in particular. And as a prison governor then, obviously it's about control, and it's about having safe, secure, humane custody, all of those things, but also then a smooth running of a prison. So why not change your visits so that the prisoners have a better experience of it, and the dividend for the prison can be that they behave better in order to get those visits. We use an IEP scheme in the prison service, an incentivised regimes programme, where prisoners are on different behaviour levels. So that's a good starting point for us in terms of finding out who are the people who already get the idea about behaviour-based better facilities being available to prisoners. So why not turn that and use your visits to do that as well. So we developed a model, and that the group that was chaired by Paul Murphy developed a model, and I'll just talk through the model because that model is what I'm chair of an implementation group of that report, so a lot of its genesis comes from there. So visits as a core element in rehabilitation. So just to put some figures on that, in Limerick Prison, this year there was 8,638 visits. So 11,693 adults visited and 4,658 children. Now they may be repeat visits, the statistics are fairly raw, but they are nonetheless, that's, in my view, if we say there's 8,638 visits, that's 8,638 missed opportunities to do something a little bit different. So communications is the first pillar that we looked at, and that has been looked at in terms of information for people coming to visit the prison, notice boards, DVDs, feedback, softening down what we do and getting the message across to both prisoners and to visitors about how visits can work in a better way. The actual visiting arrangements, the physical structures, Vivian spoke about that around having different levels of normalization in the visits, where you have, yes, there's a need for security type visits for people who breach the security systems or attempt to breach the security systems, where you have to have full screen, but my view is our standard visiting offering should be a table and chairs sitting around the table where people can have a normal conversation. And I think you're right. I think that people would only not get that when they show that they can't survive in that environment, that they try and breach it, or that there's issues there on those visits. So staff training, and again this is the cultural shift piece, which of course we all know is the hardest thing to do. And the prison service, Limerick Prison is in existence since 1819. I'm not sure they did visits back then, but I was looking at a photograph of Limerick Prison that dated back to the late 70s, and visits were a porta cabin. So that was where we put them in terms of priority. Our offering at the moment is still quite poor, in my view, but it's improving. We've put up a lot of prisoner art, and we've tried our best to try and change. But there's a mindset issue that you have a prison officer sitting at the top of a visiting box with his arms folded, watching to make sure nothing passes over the counter. What is he achieving apart from a security function? Very little. Or she? Very little. Why not get those people involved in the relationship with the prisoners and the families, so we deepen our understanding so that we can help these people to understand their own responsibilities around parenting, which is in the first instance, and also their responsibilities around their relationships. And maybe that will be part of what makes a change for that individual. So development of courses then would be around parenting, relationship stuff, as I said, getting people to look differently at their relationships now that they have the time. And again, Vivian mentioned it around that we're not as overcrowded as we used to be, so we can actually start putting our minds to these kind of initiatives rather than getting stuck down into just churning numbers of prisoners all the time. So the Fines Act will give us another break on that, hopefully, with less people coming to prison for fines. The traffic in Limerick Prison on fines. We have about 2,400 committed to Limerick Prison every year. Nearly half of them are females, and nearly, I think, 7 out of every 10 people that come to the prison for committal are for fines. And I think that's ridiculous. But anyway, that's dealt with in terms of the Fines Act. So the development of courses, just to stop digressing, Pat, okay? So community follow-up is a very important part for us as well, and our work with Bedford Row is very important. And I suppose what this model is showing is a kind of a flow that prison becomes part of the community. So if people come into prison, we change how we look at the visits, there's courses, there's a community follow-up, so you achieve reintegration, rehabilitation, possibly, reintegration, hopefully, definitely. And a positive reintegration may well lead to rehabilitation. So why not go there? And security. So securities is what we do. I'm a securocrat, it's my job, but I'm a believer that if we get our security right, we have the walls are strong and high, we have bars on the windows, we do all that kind of stuff, and we securely screen people like in an airport, and then we can relax. We have our security dealt with. So do we really need to have physical barriers after that? Yes, there are issues, and you have to risk assess the people that you're dealing with in terms of those visits, but I'd sooner take the hit and find out that a guy couldn't have that than not give it to him. And I think we have to be brave enough to say that, and in fairness to the staff in Limerick Prison are very open to changing what we do and looking at how, we're going to talk a bit about that, how we can actually change this mindset and actually use the visits as a tool for managing the prison, I think. So, what we've done in Limerick. Well, as I said, I'm the chair of the national group, and it was decided that Limerick would be a champion prison for this initiative. So the development of the relationships with partners is a key piece. This is what I was talking about with Larry in Bedford Row, CDI, who with a conversation with the IPRT got some funding from the Catherine Howard Foundation around the parenting initiative that we're starting, and I'll get to that in a second, in Limerick. So, I think that the development of relationships of outside partners, and Vivian, you alluded to this as well, it's so important that we all kind of look at this from the same direction. and that we all look at it with the people, the family, the child in the centre, and say how can we all, as a group of interested people, and some statutory and some non-statutory, actually make an impact here. So the probation service has a role, psychology, the University of Limerick, who are helping us in our evaluating our parenting programme that we're putting in place in Limerick, and you know, I think that there's huge selflessness and generosity around the various people who are involved, particularly in this actual initiative. Nobody is kind of selfish about their own patch or product or whatever it is. Everybody just sees that there's a great opportunity to do something quite different here, and that they're willing to be part of it. So we have a local implementation group in the prison. We've started our staff training, which we've done with Bedford Row. This is around delivering a programme that's been developed between CDI and Parents Plus. It will be evaluated by UL, and we hope that this will actually inform the future strategy of the Irish Prison Service. We're getting into our next business planning cycle, and I firmly believe, and I know Michael Donlan does, that family visits and how we do what we do will be at the core of the next strategic document that the Prison Service put forward early in 2015. So our action plan going forward for 2015 is to select families. So we're going to select 10 to 20 families. First group will have 10 families in it, and we'll roll out a Parenting Plus programme where the mothers will be facilitated in Bedford Row, and the fathers in Limerick Prison, and the same facilitators will be delivering, and they'll come back then and do work together on a special visit arrangement that we'll put in place for them whilst in Limerick Prison, and then we'll do a formal graduation and a celebration for the people and the families in a nice setting, and we'll review, evaluate, and we'll repeat it. And hopefully we will write the book on how to do this. Yes, we'll make mistakes, it's a learning curve, that's great, and we will then inform the Irish Prison Service in other locations how to do this. You know, they'll have to find their own community links, but we can roll this out across the prison estate. I'll be introducing Larry, but just to finish off, I think that this is a massive change of mindset, and people spoke about that this morning. It's one of the themes that's rattling around in my own mind, that we have to change from visits from being a security-based event to an actual intervention-based event. And if we can do that, and I think that people get more out of it as well in terms of prison officers' intrinsic motivation around work, that they'll actually feel better about coming into work, where they're actually making a difference. And I see that because there was a huge positive response to the training that was provided in Bedford Row. So Larry Cléir is the project leader of Bedford Row and works very closely with the prison. So I'll finish there and we'll take questions in a minute, but I'll just hand over to Larry to talk a bit about Bedford Row. So thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody, and once again I'd like to thank Fiona and Aisling for having us here. It's a great privilege to be asked to speak here and to represent Bedford Row. It's also a great privilege to represent the families that are the heart of Bedford Row, and we're not here today really, but I suppose I'm trying to represent them. And like all organisations, Bedford Row has a heart and head. I always get the head jobs for some reason, but and it's lovely to see St. Ingrid's Trust here as well, and we'll be having a chats with you later, hopefully. And now, I'll just go through the work that we've been doing since 1999 in Bedford Row. We started, I think we asked the governor at the time, Mercy sister Noreen asked the governor, had he alone with kettle, and we started giving people cups of tea and then play materials for children, just in a prefab outside the prison at the time, and the prefab has much improved since then, thanks be to God. But I suppose that's just how we started, when we grew everything from that then, kind of organically, and I suppose mostly indigenously. And one of the most important things is listening, and I'll be coming back to that in a couple of minutes. And then we were very fortunate to get, once again, from a religious organisation, the Franciscans, a centre in Limerick City, which they were very generous to give us a nice building there. And in that centre, over the years, we've built up a lot of different work. And I suppose currently what we would have is life skills for mothers and grandmothers of prisoners, and people, I suppose, know that those mothers and grandmothers often carry a disproportionate burden of the imprisonment experience. For family members, if they so wish, we have counselling and psychotherapy available. We do a lot of crisis intervention as well within that. A very big part of our work is social work support for families, and we have 2 social workers working for us, and I'll come back to that in a moment also. We have children's and teens groups, all children affected by imprisonment, and we have a play therapist who comes in every Wednesday to meet children and their parents, and that's included in the social work support. We have a men's group as we speak. They're probably assembling in Bedford Row. Every Friday we have a men's group who are composed of ex-prisoners who do a lot of different activities, and they're huge mutual support to each other. And this engagement is voluntary. And in the centre as well, we have, I suppose, a drop-in centre, and anybody can walk in off the street. A lot of people who might be homeless or a lot of people in deep distress from imprisonment can just walk in, and we try to have a listening ear there and a very wide range of advocacy. And anybody who has ever worked with people who have been in prison or who have been touched by imprisonment will know that it's sometimes find it difficult to access supports in the communities a lot of us take for granted. And finally, we raise funds to keep it all going. And it's important for a community agency, I think, to acknowledge that the funding comes, the prison service are very generous. They give us about 50% of our funding, without which we wouldn't exist at all, and that's fantastic. It gives us a springboard to look for more funding. The Mercy Sisters are very good to us, and they have been since the inception. And we have a Mercy Sister actually working for us as a social worker. And then we have our local philanthropist, JP McManus, who owns all those horses. He gives us a few bob as well. And we have other trusts and foundations, like St. Stephen's Green Trust and the Ireland Funds and that, who have funding available for this kind of work. So we're really very lucky, and it's I suppose the funders believe that in our vision, and we're absolutely delighted about that. We still have a vision worthy of believing in. Now, I mainly talk, because we're talking about the imprisonment experience really here, I'll just talk about our links with Limerick Prison. And the first one is the Hospitality Centre. And the first thing we need to say is that without the cooperation and without the close liaison with prison officers, we really wouldn't be able to do our work at all. And we have always found that in the visiting area, we kind of work along with the prison officers to ensure that the burden, or to try and ease the burden on families that are visiting. And sometimes people are refused visits because they don't adhere to the security thing. They may have drugs on them, or they may have been some reason or another. And they are very difficult situations. Sometimes people think that we can sway the powers that be to get, but we can't, of course, and neither can the prison officers who are doing the processing. But we can listen in those very difficult situations if people refuse visits to their loved ones. And we can also then refer down to Bedford Row, which, by the way, is the name of a street in Limerick. We're called after a street because that's where we were set up. And we can link them down to Bedford Row at further supports if that's what they wish for at that time. And it's fed back to us that this centre, the Hospitality Centre, is particularly valuable. And I know that Teresa is here from Dawson. So people who have been involved in hospitality outside the prison, involved in this kind of work, will know that it's for people who travel long distances. And if they might be from a small town or a village, there mightn't be that much in the way of supports locally. So it's a particularly valuable service for that. So that's what's fed back to us there. Now, in the men's prison, we have a social worker who visits weekly, and once again, his visits are facilitated by the authorities in the prison, by Pat and the other assistant governors and the chiefs, to engage men prior to the end of sentence. Sometimes prisoners are in great distress, and families request that that Brian visits the prisoner just to kind of ease whatever might be on his mind. And Vivian talked about parenting and the fact that being a dad is kind of suspended when you go to prison. So Brian is a kind of a trusted broker between men who are in the prison and his wife or his partner on the outside. And that area of work has really grown in the last couple of years. He kind of holds this kind of a conflict, so that the dad has a say, but the mum has a say as well. So then both might have a different perspective on what's good for the child, and that's a really important part of the work. And the issues that that Brian would come up with would often centre around anger and fear and control and a despair that anything will change. And I know that studies that have been done in England would show that an ex-prisoner is, I think, 10 times more likely to do self-harm or commit suicide than the normal person in the population. So that's obviously there is a despair, and Brian feels that sometimes there's a despair that anything will change, and we try to say what can we do about the change himself. That would be our philosophy there. Actually, I was working with a man there last week who was just 37, and he spent 22 of his years in prison. 20 years since he was 15, he's been in and out of prison. And the only thing that's keeping him going is that he has a 3-year-old son at the moment, and that was the only motivation I could ever use with him. And he said to me the other day, now that he's given up the drugs, his mother and his 2 sisters are talking to him. So that's another bit of motivation. But it is really true that being a dad is a huge motivation, and that's what we hope to build on when we do the parenting work that Pat was talking about. And finally, we do the liaison with accommodation and addiction services, employment providers, if we can. We're kind of a one-stop shop there, and Brian himself is an ex-probation officer, as you know, so he's a great link with the probation office and with the courts. And in fact, we meet people at a difficult time, between the court and between the being arrested and the court, which is a very difficult time when no agency is involved with them really, because they're not on anything, they haven't been sentenced. Now, within the women's prison, because as people know, there's a women's prison in Limerick with a social worker visits bi-weekly. That's Bernie, another staff member. And Albie talked about the difficulties, particular difficulties of women who are in prison. Sometimes we find that they go in and out for short periods. So we have a parallel program on the outside supporting very vulnerable women who have severe relationship and family difficulties. And I suppose we try to be present to the suffering. Sometimes there's really nothing we can do except be present to that suffering, which is I'm not saying it's more acute, but it's more evident certainly by the suffering that women feel when they're separated from their children, because of, I suppose, the culture that we have in our society, and the family discord and the breakup of the family that's felt very acutely by women. Our research in 2008, the voices of families affected by imprisonment, showed isolation, even in communities where quite a lot of people in the community may go to prison. Isolation is a huge thing and a very debilitating factor. So we try to build up a sense of camaraderie, and that's what the parallel program comes in, and a sense of belonging in something significant and nurturing. And everybody here knows, I'm sure, that all studies in child development and research would show that children thrive over a long period of time in something that's significant in their lives and also nurturing. I'll finish up now with this slide, and it's our future involvement in parenting. And as I said, we've been working in partnership with the officers in Limerick Prison to strengthen and to do this since 1999 when we had that kettle. But we want to strengthen those relationships now, and we've done it already. Actually, we've made a good start. We've made a good start by the training, which was most enjoyed by everyone in Bedford who took part, and I got very good feedback as well that the officers enjoyed it. And to build up that sense of a team with common goals, and the safety and the well-being of children affected by imprisonment being at its centre, and also, of course, the reduction of recidivism. There's loads of other goals as well that we have, but they'll be the two main ones, the umbrella ones, if you like. I hope and I think, and I'm absolutely sure that we will learn from each other. We've already learned a lot from the prison, what it's like to be a prison officer and to be charged with that very responsible a mixture of security and care. It's a huge responsibility, and it was wonderful just to hear those 2 days training that the common ground that we did have. And then I think one great aim of Bedford Row would be to develop a long-term strategy that's sustainable, resource-wise and emotionally sustainable, so that we get to know each other well, because parenting is an emotional exercise most of the time. There's a lot of practical things to be done in parenting, but it's mostly an emotional thing. So we need to kind of match that and model the good enough methods of parenting or relating. So then that's what we're looking for, is a good enough parent, not a perfect parent. We don't have to be perfect either. And we have the people from UL, as Pat said, to evaluate and reflect on what is working, and we really welcome that as well. And with the Childhood Development Initiative from Tala, and ourselves, and the prison, the three-pronged approach, and the parents plus charity. What's working and what maybe we need to tweak that mightn't be working. And then, as Pat said as well, to disseminate information as the work proceeds and when the work is over, so that people will be informed. I suppose I'll just finish with that, just to say that one, if Albie doesn't mind me borrowing a proverb from Africa, because I couldn't find one, but one thing that we kind of hold dear in Bedford Row is that old proverb, and I don't know where it came from because I wouldn't be very good at origins of things really, but if you want to travel fast, go alone, but if you want to travel far, go together. And I love that because that embodies what we're going to do. We're going to try and do it together, and we're going to, nobody's going to run ahead with a major plan and leave the others behind, and that's what we want to model as well in parenting. And I myself am inspired by a book, and always have been, by Martin Luther King Jr., who of course everybody knows. Martin Luther King. It's a very simple book, but a very profound book called Why We Can't Wait. And children who are affected by imprisonment and who are suffering, they can't wait. Now, obviously, Dr. King's book was about the black experience in America, but we have people who can't wait as well, and we try to keep that in our own heads and to keep us motivated. And I'm just going to finish there, and I'd like to thank you very much, and looking forward to the rest of the speakers. Thank you.